Good morning and Happy New Year. So, as I was thinking about the new year, and I knew I was going to greet you all with Happy New Year, I was like, it's already the 7th of January. And then I remembered I don't remember any longer if it's a Curb Your Enthusiasm or a Seinfeld episode, but they ask, when do you stop saying Happy New Year? What point is the cutoff date? It seems to me that saying Happy New Year every day would be all right. Why not? Every day represents a new moment, and every moment is a new year, so to speak. But I'll stop saying Happy New Year after this week, at least until next year. Anyhow, nice to see you all. This morning, I'm going to give a talk that's titled "The Ultimate Path is Without Difficulty," which is the title of a koan. And koans are teaching stories in the Zen tradition. They're often between a teacher and a student, and they can sometimes be discussions between teachers as well. And when we first encounter them, they can seem kind of puzzling to us. Though, as Steve Hagen's teacher, Diana Katagiri, pointed out when Steve said something about a koan being a puzzle to him, Katagiri just kind of got a sour look on his face, said, "No puzzle." So these aren't actually puzzles. They're not things to figure out, but they can seem that way when you first encounter them. And I know when I first started reading koans, to me, they were just things to laugh at. You'd read something, somebody would do something bizarre, and then the end of it would just say, "And then he was enlightened." Or somebody would do something bizarre, somebody would get hit, and then they'd be enlightened. And it just didn't make a lot of sense. So this teaching isn't quite that bizarre, just to let you know. But it is a koan, and it's been on my mind in part because the teaching that is referred to in this koan, I think, is something that we struggle with a lot about life and about taking up a practice like this. And it came up again, if any of you took Toku Cynthia Scott's class on the Shin Shin Ming, or Trusting the Heart Mind, it's the opening line basically of that poem. And so it really got me to thinking about our way and life and difficulty. And so without further ado, I'll just read the koan and then I'll talk a little bit about it. I'll talk quite a bit about it. Joshu, teaching the assembly, said the ultimate path is without difficulty. Just avoid picking and choosing. As soon as there are words spoken, this is picking, this is clarity. This old monk does not abide within clarity. Do you still preserve anything or not? At that time, a certain monk asked, since you do not abide within clarity, what do you preserve? Joshu replied, I don't know either. The monk said, since you don't know, teacher, why do you nevertheless say that you do not abide within clarity? Joshu said, it is enough to ask about the matter, bow, and withdraw. So there might have been some stuff in there. There's a way that this is written that teasing this out is going to be, I think, helpful. Because it probably just sounded like, what? Who is saying what and why, how, and that's the way these things can function. So I'm just going to start out with this opening teaching. First of all, Joshu is a very important teacher. He was one of the great teachers in the Chang dynasty, had many students, and was a great teacher. So one of the ways that he taught, you may be familiar with a stereotype of Zen teaching, that Zen teaching is, you ask a teacher, like, teacher, what is the nature of reality? And then the teacher gets whacks you with a stick or goes, or, something like that. And you go, what is that? And there was that kind of teaching was being developed at about this time, but Joshu didn't resort to slaps or hits or barks or yells or anything like that. He actually did his teaching in words. So he was considered to be a teacher of, there's a phrase they use, I can't remember, of like the sweet tongue or something like that. So that's just Joshu. So he's a great teacher. And he comes out and he says to his assembly, the ultimate path is without difficulty, just avoid picking and choosing. This apparently was not an uncommon teaching from Joshu. There's actually another koan in the collection of koans that I got this from. So koans are often collected into books. And the book that I got this from is called the Blue Cliff Record. And there are 100 koans in it. And at least one of the other koans has Joshu teaching the assembly, the ultimate path is without difficulty, just avoid picking and choosing. So it was a teaching that he used often. And I think there's something about this teaching that perhaps was like a strike of the stick. You know, it was something like that, because there's something very direct about the teaching. It really hits at the core of us as we move through life, and life seems to be difficult. And perhaps we encounter a way like this, and then we try to take up a practice like this, and the practice seems to be difficult because life is so difficult. And it seems like what this practice might be asking of us adds just more difficulty on difficulty. It seems to be impossible to us. And so it's very direct. It just says the ultimate path is without difficulty. And if you think of what Joshu's trying to do there, he's not trying to like tell you you can't have difficulty. He's saying don't experience difficulty. He's just saying the great way is without difficulty, or the ultimate path is without difficulty. So when difficulties are arising, well, what's showing up there? What is it that we're experiencing? When we think that taking up a practice like Zen practice, when we think that this is difficult, and I hear people say that this is impossible. How can you do this? It's partly because we get stuck with words like the ultimate path, or in another translation I have, it's the supreme way. So we hear the ultimate path or the supreme way, or maybe you encounter the word enlightenment, or maybe there's some idea you have about what it is that we're doing in meditation practice. And we get stuck in that, the ultimate way. I mean, the ultimate way, that's the ultimate, that's like the top, that's the chief way. That is the way. The supreme way is, I mean, we're like talking hierarchy when we look at these words. We think ultimate path. This is just like, we look at our own lives and I go, I don't know what the ultimate path is, but I know that that's not ultimate. I know that's not very supreme. And so there's this thing, the ultimate path or the supreme way, and it seems so far away from us. It seems like it's light years away. That is something that we can't possibly achieve, and that no human being can possibly achieve this. So that is one of the things that this teaching helps us to see, is that we encounter these words, and suddenly it seems very difficult to us. And in fact, that's what Joshu says after he offers this teaching. He says, the ultimate path is without difficulty. Just avoid picking and choosing. And I'll talk about that in a second. But he does go on to say that as soon as there are words spoken, this is picking and choosing. This is clarity. So this is one that's a little hard to hear, how this line scans. He says, as soon as there are words spoken, so as soon as we say anything, as soon as we say ultimate path, as soon as we say supreme way, now we've got picking and choosing, or as another translation puts it, the supreme way has no difficulty. It just rejects discrimination. So whenever we say something, we've got discrimination and we've got clarity. Picking and choosing and clarity. And you might not quite understand that binary. Picking and choosing or discrimination, we could say confusion and clarity. When we get caught up in our discrimination, we actually start to overlook the nature of reality itself, which is without difficulty, without discrimination. So when we get caught up in our discrimination or picking and choosing, then there's lack of clarity. So all Joshu's telling us is that as soon as words are spoken, that's what shows up. Do you see? There's confusion and clarity. There's picking and choosing and clarity. And the ultimate way, the supreme path, or the ultimate path, supreme way, right? That's clarity. And then there's this other thing that's not clarity. So as soon as we say anything, this is what shows up. And this in and of itself is picking and choosing. It's discrimination right there. It's built right into it. And it's what we do in our life. We do all the time. We discriminate. It's how we get through the world. So one of the things people will hear about this teaching, you know, especially when you first encounter it, it'll sound like people are saying, well, you don't discriminate. You don't have preferences. Well, good luck with that. Good luck not having preferences. They're going to show up. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a little bit when we look at some of the language that Joshu actually uses to talk about this. But this is not talking about really not having any preferences at all. They're just going to show up. And so our regular life, preferences are showing up. The need to pick and choose, that's going to show up. We're going to have to do one thing or another, right? That's just the way that life shows up. We're going to have to do one thing or another. And it often shows up in the form of, I like this, I don't like this. I like this is okay. This one's okay. This can stay around. We could do more of this and no more of this. I'm done with this. We could be done with this. And these two poles of I like this, I don't like this, are taught in another way in Buddhist teachings as two of the three poisons. And they're stated in ways that are slightly different from I like this and I don't like this. It's greed. I like this. I want to have it. If you don't have it, you don't think you have it, you want to have it. That's greed. So it's my water. You can't have any of this. This is my water. I like this water. You can't have any of this water. Or boy, I wish that I had some Kool-Aid in this water right now and make it even better tasting. When I was camping this summer, I went to the Boundary Waters for the first time, and they gave us packets of Kool-Aid to put in our water to help get rid of the weird taste that the filter made. I hadn't had Kool-Aid, I don't know when the last time I drank Kool-Aid was, but I was like, really? I'm gonna be drinking Kool-Aid on a camp? I thought I was getting back to nature and I'm gonna be drinking Kool-Aid. But then we tasted some of that filtered water without the Kool-Aid, and I went, let's try the Kool-Aid and see what happens. But I like this, I don't like this, right? Greed, I want to hang on to the thing I like, or I want the thing that I think I don't have. And hatred, which is just aversion to this. This is not good. I don't like this. Two of the three poisons. And the third one is self-delusion. And that one is just when we get caught up in a sense of our ego, which we know we do all the time. And we don't even question what it is that's happening there. So what Joshu is pointing to, I think, when he's talking about the ultimate path is without difficulty, just avoid picking and choosing. I think what the clarity of that teaching can be made even more so if we just look at what he's quoting. So I told you he was quoting a poem, the Shin Shin Ming, or Trusting the Heart Mind. I thought I'd just read the opening few lines of this poem and then talk about them, because they really do help us to see what it is that Joshu is pointing to. The great way is not difficult. There is nothing it prefers. Only when you neither love nor hate does it appear clearly without disguise. A hair's breadth of difference, and heaven and earth are set apart. If you wish to see it, then hold no opinions, either for or against. To set what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. So it just sort of unfolds that original teaching. The great way is difficult. There is nothing it prefers. Now, that opening line, I just want to remind you of the way that Joshu put it. He said, the ultimate path is without difficulty. Just avoid picking and choosing. Or in this other translation, The supreme way is no difficulty. It just rejects discrimination. And actually, when I look at both those translations, they have a slightly different inflection to them. Another translation of the Shinshin Ming. I'm only tossing these translations out so you can see something that's going on in there. So again, if you look at Joshu's teaching is the ultimate path is without difficulty, just avoid picking and choosing. Well, who's avoiding picking and choosing? What's he talking about there? And the other translation of this koan is the supreme way is no difficulty. It just rejects discrimination. Well, what's rejecting discrimination there? And when we look at the one translation of trusting the heart mind, the great way is not difficult. There is nothing it prefers. Well, what is not preferring at that moment? And then the other translation has the great way is not difficulty for those who have no preferences. And who has no preferences? I hope you're seeing there's this thing where it seems to be moving. These translations seem to be moving back and forth between what we might think of as it, whatever it is, the great way. And what is the great way? The great way is just this. It's just this. And it's great because it can't get any better than this. We might think it can, but here it is. It just doesn't get any better. This is, in some ways, the ultimate, the tip top, because there's any place else to go. This is the end of the line. This is our way station, whatever it is. But this is the end of the line right here. And sometimes it seems like it's saying the great way. This has no preferences. And just pay attention to reality. Just pay attention to the way that things unfold. It doesn't have any preferences. It just does. It seems to do whatever. So seemingly horrible things happen. And seemingly wonderful things happen. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of reason to it, any kind of logic to it at all. Because there isn't logic to it at all. But we want there to be logic to it, some kind of logic. So we can see the great way, reality itself, this has no preferences. It's not picking and choosing. It's just flowing like it does. And then there's the, for those who have no preferences, the great way is not difficult. And that seems to be talking about us who are taking up this way, who are living this life. Joshu, at least that original translation of the koan, he just says just avoid picking and choosing. So he's not really going to land any way, but we can see, we can put ourselves in there. So if you think about the fact that reality has no preferences to it, it just is this continual flow. If we can live a life that doesn't live out of picking and choosing, doesn't live out of preferences, then we're living in a way that's in accord with the nature of reality, that has no preferences. And we can start to see, of course, that we're not separate from reality. This is the difficulty we have. This is that self-delusion. One of the three poisons is the way that we usually think of ourselves as outside of reality. Just think about how you move through your life and how there seems to be you moving through a world. That's the way things seem to appear. That's the way that we usually negotiate the world. So the great way is not difficult. There's nothing it prefers. So just keep that in mind. There's nothing reality prefers. And for those who have no preferences, the great way is not difficult. Life, this practice. Only when you neither love nor hate does it appear clearly without disguise. So just think again, when you're responding or reacting to reality, you want to hang on to that thing. You love it so much, you just want to hang on to it. Or maybe you love it so much, it becomes your reality for a while. So I have too many books. I own too many books. That is my nature. It doesn't have to be that way. It's just the way that I am. And last year, I was just reminded of this because I was once again dusting my books. And I saw my area that is sort of incoming book area. So they're the books that I purchased within the last year or so now. So I saw this book, and it was The Diaries of Franz Kafka. And it's a new version of The Diaries of Franz Kafka. Not just a new translation, it's actually a new version. So when the diaries were first published, and they weren't ever supposed to be published, if you know the story of Kafka, when he passed away, he told his friend to be his executor and told him, I want you to burn all of my unpublished manuscripts, all of it. And his friend went ahead and had it all published, which would have mortified Kafka. But he went ahead and he published it, and he published the diaries, but he took out stuff that he thought was maybe not so good for people to read this stuff. Just personal things about Kafka. He just took it out of there. Well, these new diaries, they put it back in finally after all this time, and it apparently gives you a slightly different feeling for the character of Franz Kafka, a slightly more playful person. And I think sometimes we get this idea that he's just serious, you know. If you've ever read Kafka, you know there's actually a lot of humor and joy in his stories, actually, with all the trepidation and fear and all the horrible stuff that's in there. But anyhow, so I heard about that book. I'm only saying this because this is about how things that we hold can actually disguise reality from us. When I heard that this book was coming out, I went, oh my God, I have to have this book. I have to have this book. So I like buying books at bookstores. So now you're seeing all my preferences. This is what I like to do. I don't like to order from Amazon. I don't order books from Amazon. So I'm like, now I got to find out if there's a bookstore that has this book. So I'm online looking at all the local bookstores trying to see if they have this Kafka's Diaries. And I finally located one. So I called them up to make sure that they had it. And if they could reserve it, then I was going to have them reserve the book for me. And sure enough, they said, yeah, we'll hold on to it for I don't know, 3 days or whatever it was. So for those 3 days, I was going, oh my goodness, I have to get down to that bookstore. And I was looking at my schedule going, when am I going to have time? Because it's in St. Paul. When am I going to have time to drive to this bookstore? All I thought about for those 3 days, all my whole life was getting that book. And here I am talking about it again. I remember I was teaching a class and I brought it up. And after the class was done, somebody who's a member here knows that I read a lot of books. He himself was an English professor. And he said, Steve, forget about the Kafka. Just read the Buddhist literature now. And I was just like, I can't get it out of my mind. So I bought it, of course. And now it's sitting in my incoming book area, unread. For 3 days, my whole reality was nothing but that Kafka book. And that's the way we are. That we don't quite see that, but the things we grab hold of, that's our reality. So only when neither love nor hate, only when you neither love nor hate does it appear clearly. Then you're no longer captivated by the object that you're wanting or not wanting. Only when you can just be. Just allow that to be, allow those feelings to be and not grab hold of them. Can you really see the nature of reality, which is, it's that feeling. So I'm not saying that I shouldn't have wanted that Kafka book. I wanted that Kafka book, but boy, I was grabbing hold of that. That was my whole world. I didn't have to do that, especially after I put the book on hold. I mean, goodness gracious. Let's put it that way. So reality then kind of gets blocked. It kind of becomes disguised in our way of interpreting things. So if we think some things are good and some things are bad, reality gets disguised only in that. That's the way reality appears to us. That thing is good and that thing is bad. That's the way it shows up. That is the way it's going to show up as long as we hang on to that. Again, does that mean that we go through life not thinking things are good or bad? No. But that doesn't mean that we have to obscure the nature of reality through our preferences, through our greed, or through our hatred. Because as Sang-san, the poet of Trusting the Heart Mind, points out to us, he says a hair's breadth of difference. So that discrimination, a hair's breadth. Think about that, a hair's breadth. And heaven and earth are set apart. Then the ultimate path is there. And the supreme path, or the ultimate path or supreme path is there. And my daily life is here. And oh my God, and then Zen wants me to do what? In order to get on that path, I have to do what? I have to, I don't know, quell my feelings or whatever it is. I mean, people have all kinds of ideas and I'm not going to fill your head with them, you know. But once we discriminate, then that sets something we call enlightenment or the great way apart from us. And it'll seem impossible for us to get there. Sang-san continues, he says, if you wish to see it, then hold no opinions. either for or against. And that is where I wanted to look at that word hold. That's it. If you wish to see it, then hold no opinions, either for or against. Opinions arise. Again, it's just the nature of life. I like pizza, and I like pizza with certain things on it. Is there something wrong with that? Well, no, there's not. But if I'm going to go to war over, or I'm going to go out to dinner and a friend of mine doesn't like the same things on his pizza, perhaps playfully, I might say, well, no self-respecting person who likes pizza would ever have pineapple on their pizza. I might say that, but if this guy really needed pineapple on his pizza, I wouldn't care. If it was really that bad, I would just pluck it off my pizza. Do you know what I mean? But I don't. I like pizza and I like certain things. I could care less. But we don't have to hold on to those opinions. We don't have to make them the reality. We can just be aware. Well, there it is, that preference. You don't have to say this, but it'd be the equivalent. I'm like, there it is. There's my old buddy, does not like pineapple on pizza. There he is, showing up right now. That's great. And if I can order a pizza without any problems that's not going to have pineapple on it, good. That's a good thing. But I don't have to get caught up in that. And of course, the stakes can get a lot higher than that about what we think is right, what we think is wrong. I had some friends visiting from out of town. They just left this morning, actually. One of my friends is flying on United Airways, and I just learned they have 80 of those Boeing 7, whatever they were, but you know what I'm talking about, that just lost the whole side of the plane while it was in flight. So I don't know if he's actually leaving right now. They might have grounded his flight. I'm not sure. But anyhow, they were just here. And one of my friends said, so what do you guys make of the whole Gaza Israel situation? And one of my friends was just happy to fill the vacuum in. And I'm sitting up front thinking, who needs to have an opinion about, like, why do we need to have an opinion about that? So when it was done, I said, well, my feeling about it is I'm hearing from too many people about what they think about this situation. And when we express those opinions, again, we start going, this is the way it really is. This is how it really should be. These people should be doing this. They shouldn't be doing that. And, to put it colloquially, who the hell are we to say that? But there we are. And we get asked to fill in the void, and we are happy to fill it in with these opinions that we have. And then the more we say these things, the truer they appear to us, the more we take them to be the truth. But as Sing San also points out, he says, to set what you like against what you dislike is the disease of mind. And you just, not think of it as dis-ease. It's that unsettled feeling. It's dukkha. It's suffering. It's what we're struggling with. So that discrimination, that picking and choosing, it's there, we do it. But if we get caught up in it, if it hooks onto us, if we hold on to our likes and dislikes, then we've got that unsettled, that disease of mind. So after Joshu offers his teaching, then he says, interestingly enough, he says, this old monk does not abide within clarity. Do you still preserve anything or not? So what he's saying, this old monk does not abide within clarity, is he's just saying he doesn't get caught up in clarity, or more particularly about ideas about what clarity is. He does not abide within clarity. Again, if you think about the binary there, it's between unclarity or picking and choosing or preferences, the world we move around on, we have to pick and choose where preferences arise, and clarity. And he's saying, I'm not just living in clarity. I don't abide there. So the world that I live in, there's picking and choosing. There are preferences. In one way, he's saying that. And he's also saying, in saying that, he's saying, I don't get caught up in ideas about clarity. And one of the things, of course, that we get caught up in, and what he's trying to say with clarity is, what we're going to do with clarity is we make something out of it. This is sort of what I've been talking about this talk. It's clarity. It's this thing we want. It's something that's separate from what's right now. There's picking and choosing, and Preferences on one side and clarity on the other, or there's everyday life, and then there's that enlightenment where I can see what's actually going on. These things are separate, and then clarity becomes a thing. And once we have that thing, of course, then we have, this is picking and choosing, and this is clarity. And clarity just becomes another thing. And that's then what Joshu asks his students, the assembly. He says, do you preserve anything or not? Is there anything that, so when we abide, we're staying someplace, right? We're going to be there for a while. We're occupying a place. There's a place that's here for us to occupy, and we can occupy that. We're hanging on to, we're living in this space. So he says, do you preserve anything or not? Are you holding on to anything? He's asking his assembly, including perhaps an idea of clarity. Are you hanging on to anything or not? And he uses that preserve, which I think is interesting, at least in this translation. Because it seems to me preserving is a special word. Like preserving is to take care of it. So it's not, he's not asking us a usual thing, or is there something you're addicted to, right? So some of us might say, okay, well, yeah, I really like whatever it is, pamplemousse flavored sparkling water, or whatever it is. You might say, okay, I'm addicted to that because I keep buying that. I don't know. There are things that we can probably see that we prefer and hang on to that preference. But he's talking about the stuff you preserve. Is there some cherished thing, clarity or enlightenment, that you're hanging on to, that you're taking care of, that you're still abiding in? Are you abiding in clarity? So after Joshu says this, after he asks his assembly this, a monk says, well, since you do not abide within clarity, what do you preserve? Which I think is a really sharp question. Because it's a sharp question if you do what it is that Joshu's trying to help us to see that we do. This is clarity. This is lack of clarity. So he's picking up on a sense that, well, if Joshu's saying I don't abide in clarity, then there must not be clarity. So then you must be hanging on to something, because there's not clarity. So now there's picking and choosing, now there are preferences. So do you preserve anything? It even, I think, what the student is pointing out, even expresses an understanding that not abiding within clarity might be an even subtler form of this is picking and choosing, this is clarity. Do you see? So on one hand, the student is just picking up the sense that, oh, okay, there's a bit of a logic game there. If you're not in clarity, then you must be unclear. Because again, that's being caught up in that binary. And if you're unclear, what are you hanging on to? And what he's perhaps hinting that Joshu's hanging on to is not abiding within clarity. That you have abiding in clarity and not abiding within clarity. And are you preserving that? Are you hanging on to not abiding within clarity? Are you making something out of that? And now abiding within, not abiding within clarity? And you could see how curly-cued this is getting. I don't even mean to do this, but this is what we do, and we can do this so easily. And when you encounter these teachings and they're trying to stop us from doing that, like I said, the opening line of Joshu's teaching, which is just the ultimate path is without difficulty, just avoid picking and choosing. It's like that, right? It takes us right back. It keeps the curly cues from happening, but then we start them going again, these whirlpools, these eddies that we get caught up in. So Joshu attempts at that point to not stir the waters up any further. They're already getting this student is kind of churning them up, this monk. So Joshu says, I don't know either. I don't know. Steve Hagen's recent talk, he talked about where you envisioned a cartoon, I think it was, that had 4 panels, and said, I don't know that I know, right? And this seems to me what Joshu is saying. I don't know either. Joshu understands that to say anything misses the mark. But the more he says, remember, as he says, once we say anything, this is picking and choosing, this is clarity. Once you do that, so he understands that to say anything is to miss the mark. Joshu is pointing directly to what we call in Zen, don't know mind. We go through the world like I was talking about. So what do you think about what's going on in Israel and Gaza? We have no mind usually where we know what's going on and we're more than happy to share what we know is going on with others. But Zen is don't know mind, right? Understand that what you think you know is very limited in perspective, right? And that it's really not knowing at all. And to realize that, to approach the world, to live in the world, understanding that you're understanding that what's going on is limited. But understanding that in a way that's light, that is in the way that Joshu is pointing out here, which is, I don't know either. It's a nature of reality. Don't know reality. We know reality in that we experience reality. We know this, but we don't know it in the way that we usually talk about, which is knowing it, right? We don't intellectually understand this moment at all. I mean, once you can come up with some ideas about what it is that's going on, but once you start to press those ideas, once you start asking, the kinds of questions that children do, where they might ask you like, why is the sky blue? And then you start going through all this and the child is going to keep going. Like there's no point at which the child is like happy with where you've just stopped. And it eventually ends up with the parent saying, at least this is what my mom would say, because I said so. So at some point it'll just stop asking these questions because there is in that nature. You'll never come to the bottom of it. That's the one thing that you see about when we approach the world in kind of a rational way and we're trying to figure things out and we never seem to get at it. That's a great teaching. That's absolutely right. As long as that's what you do, you're never going to get now just right, the ultimate path, is without difficulty. It's just right here, and it brings you right back. So the more you spin out, the more you get caught up in these eddies, the more you get caught up in the eddies. That's just the nature of it. But getting caught up in the eddies, at some point you go, I'm caught up in an eddy. Maybe the feeling, because I'm saying it is so lighthearted, but maybe that feeling is, I've heard people describe getting caught up in a whirlpool. Guy who was in whitewater rafting and then he got kicked out of the raft and then he got caught up in the churning water, but it's like an eddy and he got pulled under and he had no idea if he was coming back up again. And he eventually just got kicked up downstream, but he had no power over that. So we get caught up in those eddies, boom, we're under. And so do we struggle against that? And what? Or do we just open ourselves up to the current? And the first time I ever kayaked, I did a couple dumb things. My friends and I went on level 5 whitewater. We just thought, we didn't know. And we just went, well, we want it to be fun, And then they gave us helmets. And we were like, well, that's interesting. They gave us helmets. And then we got to a part where the whitewater, if you were to ask me what we were approaching, it was a waterfall, but it was a small one. It was probably only a couple feet, And this is what I did. I know that I have a tendency to get my head in the way and cause problems. So and I'm not saying this was good, but it actually helped me. I just took my paddle out of the water and I closed my eyes. And I came out okay. So do we get caught up in the eddies? And the eddies, like I said, they can really pull us under. And then you can be aware, look what I'm doing. And you can open up to the flow of what's going on and not struggle with it. So that's, I don't know either, right? That's actually seeing how we get caught up in what we think we know and the eddies that can cause for us and how that can pull us under, how suffering is really rooted in our ways of putting the world together, of conceptualizing this. And then the monk said, so Joshu, I think, was pretty much saying, yeah, okay, that's all fine and interesting, but I don't know. And that's final. We'll say that's the final answer. But then the monk goes on, he goes, well, since you don't know, teacher, why do you nevertheless say that you do not abide within clarity? So he's still getting at this idea that you can hang on to the idea of not abiding in clarity as an idea, if that makes sense. So he's saying, since you don't know, teacher, how do you say that you do not abide within clarity then? Because if you don't know, and knowing is like being in the world of preference and being in the world of picking and choosing, and not knowing then would be in the world of clarity. So how is it that you can say that you're not in the world of clarity? And again, we get to that. The monk is asking some good questions, but you can hear he's caught up in clarity and not clarity, picking and choosing and clarity. He's getting caught up in that dichotomy. So he's trying to pin Joshu down into that place, and Joshu has been sidestepping. He's been dancing with the student a little bit. Because again, for the monk, it's got to be one way or the other. It's Joshu's response to this that I really love. Because you really do, after he says, I don't know, and the monk persists and asks it in another way that's more subtle, in a way you just kind of go, well, what can Joshu do at this point? And this is the point at which, another teacher from his era might have asked the student to come to the podium and then would have twisted his nose or something like that. But instead, Joshu actually just expresses in words. He says, it's enough to ask about the matter, bow, and withdraw. So it's enough to ask. Don't press for an answer. Right? This is what we do. We live this world, we have these questions, and then we need to have an answer. Now, granted, sometimes you need to have an answer. How do I get to the gas station that has free air in it, for example? I don't know if you've ever had problems with the air in your tire, and you got to find a gas station that actually has free air. So you got to know where that is and go to. Of course, there are answers we need to have. There are answers, and then there are answers. But what we do is we need answers all the time. And sometimes there are these things that feel like they don't have answers, because every time we try to answer them, again, it's reality. Just, hey, pay attention. Look what's going on here. You're trying to find an answer, and we put an answer there. Almost immediately, we don't even know we're putting an answer in a place where there really isn't an answer, unless somebody asks us about our answer, and then we have to go, oh, and then we realize that we didn't quite get it right. But we're looking for that answer. That's just our ordinary line of thought. We are uncomfortable when the big questions come up. The big ones, when they come up and there isn't an answer, and maybe we're suffering, and we need to know what's going on and why this is happening so that we aren't suffering anymore, that makes us uncomfortable. And so I just want to really quickly backtrack to Joshu's teaching again, just to remind you of what he's not saying, because again, people will hear this as well because of the words and what we do. Joshu says the ultimate path is without difficulty. That does not mean that it's easy. That does not mean it's easy. So we want to do that thing. We want to go, oh, there's difficulty and then there's easiness. That's not, Joshu did not say the great way is easy. He said is without difficulty. So we can be uncomfortable when we don't have those answers. That question we have can seem to be a hole, H-O-L-E. And we want to fill that H-O-L-E with an answer. We want to put something in there, fill that hole up. But what we're really trying to do, the impossibility of it, is it's actually W-H-O-L-E. It's actually the hole, and we're trying to put something in the hole. I mean, how do you put something in the hole? It's already the hole. That's what we do when we have to answer those questions that can't be answered. And we're uncomfortable when we don't do that. But living itself, don't know mind, is interrogative. It's, what's this? I mean, the question we usually ask is, why is this happening? And again, we might come up with some answers, but they never are quite satisfying. Because even if it's, why is this happening? Oh, it's because the pipes are old and they rusted, and that's why the water is trickling. But you're actually maybe not even asking that. It might be like, why is this happening to me? Right now, when I have an important meeting that I have to get to, I don't have time to deal with the fact that my house is now flooding. Right? This is not something that's supposed to be happening. Or, as many of you know, as I was driving to Dharma Field to lead a discussion group one night, my car got a flat tire, and then I realized I grabbed the cell phone that was my old iPhone that I just transferred everything onto my new iPhone and couldn't use as a phone, and I somehow grabbed my old phone, and there I was with a flat tire far enough away from Dharma Field that I couldn't get here in time to get to the study group. No way to get a hold of people at Dharma Field. Anyhow, why is this happening now? I was like, I have a discussion group to lead. Come on. And, the questions we ask ourselves, even though they seem to have that easy answer, if you really look at the nature of the question, even though it might be something really practical, as like figuring out what's leaking, but under that still is that sense that something is wrong, that sense of suffering that's there. So why is the question we often go to, thinking, well, there's going to be an answer to this because I want an answer. But really, if we look, we just say, what is this? That's one where there actually is an answer. And it's not one that has words to it. It's just, what is this? I could just here it is. Like, that's the question. What is this? And then if you think about it, that in and of itself, what is this? You could answer yes. Yes. What is this? Yes. Or you could just drop off what is this to just what? Or I think what gets at this even better, I've said this in other talks, but I do think this gets at it. If you've ever seen like comic books, but particularly like superhero comic books, and something like mind-blowing is happening, a character, I'm thinking Spider-Man, will stand there, and then over his head is a question mark and an exclamation point. Right? That's it. It's like almost in a way a thrill of what's showing up, but not knowing, but knowing what's showing up. Knowing in that right here it is, but not knowing in that we haven't pinned it down to what it is. Instead, being open to it, and that's got that exclamation point to it. So question mark, exclamation point. That's life. That is, as Joshu said, it's enough to ask about the matter. What is this? What? And then bow. That's not to turn our backs on the question. That's to acknowledge. When we come into the meditation hall, we bow to our cushions. We bow to our cushions, saying hello. We're acknowledging this is the reality right now. This is all of totality is showing up as that meditation cushion, as really as us sitting together. Reality is showing up as that. So we acknowledge, we greet. It's enough to ask about the matter, bow. He says withdraw. I'd say just move on and move on. Every moment. And that is difficult for us to do. Again, we have to move through the world. So none of this is saying don't take care of things. Take care of things with that spirit. What is this? Bow. Move on. What is this? Bow. That's it. Like I said, not difficult, which isn't to say easy. I went a little bit over what I expected. I got lost in some story there. So I don't know, do people have questions or comments? Dean, and then I don't know your name yet, but I'll find out. So one moment, Dean, as we get the, pass it over to Dean.
Steve, so you want to talk about Gaza?
About what?
Gaza, Israel, so on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said God at first. No,
So I probably didn't get everything you were saying, but it left me a little bit uncomfortable. this practice is, if it's anything, a practice about recognizing and transforming suffering. And of course, we all agree there's enormous suffering on both sides. And it's particularly real for me as just an American. I have good friends on both sides who are telling me what they've gone through. And in my own case, I feel like our practice is not to not have an opinion about that. I mean, I can't imagine telling my friends, I don't have an opinion about what happened to your cousin. I can't help but have opinions.
Yeah.
The problem is, I also respect Palestinian friends who tell me what they've been going through. And so for me, at least, the practice is so much not having an opinion, but learning to live with the pain of our own opinions and recognizing that they're fallible, and that even because these are two people I love and respect, nobody has the whole picture of the thing. So to me, it seems like the practice is more difficult and painful than not having an opinion. This is why we have the virtue of patience, for example, as a central virtue in Buddhism. I need to be patient with the fact that it's extremely painful to hear from friends who are going through this. They don't necessarily agree, but there's integrity in both of their opinions.
Yeah. Well, first of all, much of what you said is perhaps a more clearly stated version of what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Right. That, yeah, we have opinions. We have them, and everybody has them. So we can't be without those. And I don't think that's what this teaching is telling us, not to have opinions. We'll have them. And it is about realizing their provisional or their limited nature as we're expressing. It's to realize that. It's just that often we don't. We get caught up in our ideas, and the more we express them, the more we buy into them as being true. But you're right. It is about that. And it is about being open to suffering, to opening up to suffering. Because usually what we do is we close it down, right? And that's where the picking and choosing comes in. Because the suffering is what we don't want. And the thing that we feel is not suffering, say happiness or something like that. That's the stuff that we do like. So we want to try to hang on to the stuff we do like and avoid the things that we don't like. And there's the preference, the sort of picking and choosing, whereas here it is. And when we're doing that, when we're trying to shut the suffering off, Brian and I were talking a little bit this morning, and he shared with me, he could not quite remember the teaching of this from Ram Dass. And Brian, I'm still not going to quite get it right. Can you remind me of what it was?
I think he said that you have no moral right to take away another person's suffering.
You have no moral right to take away another person's suffering, right? So it's not to try to get rid of suffering even. It's to understand it's there and to live with that. And as you say, then, that can be very difficult and painful. But the nature of reality is it doesn't show up any particular way. So this way is not difficult. And as I was trying to point out, it's not easy. It can seem very difficult for us, for sure. So I don't mean to, say this is easy. Again, I was trying to point that out as well, that because we get to these places where maybe we want the pain to be assuaged, and in this case, I was talking about filling it in with an answer, trying to come up with some reason, why is this happening to me? Or why is this happening to them? That coming up with those answers in a way is just trying to avoid the suffering. It's trying to take the suffering away from somebody else, to alleviate that, which is different from what I think we do in our practice. We're not trying to take any suffering away at all. We're supporting one another in this practice. We're supporting one another in this reality that shows up as pain. It shows up as discomfort. To be with that and not to try to avoid it, not to think that we're apart from that somehow. So suffering that's occurring, there's just suffering. we'll bracket it into my suffering or their suffering. There's just suffering. And it's to realize that when you're suffering, that's just part of suffering. And to see that opens up compassion. That's what compassion is. So I don't know if that addresses your concerns, but I appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. And remind me of your name. I know
don't know
you've
my
been
name.
here.
It's Brian.
Brian?
Yes.
Okay.
So this may be an abstruse question, but this Zen teaching, faith in mind, right? The great way is not difficult, simply cease having preferences. Profound teaching like seems very true. But I've often wondered how it relates to a teaching that's more often discussed it's in the Theravadan tradition, right? It comes out of the Pali Canon where the Buddha taught, and sometimes Theravadan teachers teach as a practice to distinguish sensations. And I don't know the Pali words, but to distinguish sensations as being pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. And that practice of distinguishing pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, like that, again, that comes out of the Pali Canon. It's taught in Theravadan traditions. Like it puzzles me because it seems, sort of directly contrary to this idea that, if we have sensations arising, actually, like not having a label for them, right? Not labeling them as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is in fact like more consistent with sort of the Zen tradition. So I just have often wondered how those teachings relate to one another.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So when we're experiencing, when there's experience, one thing we'll want to do is maybe separate the seemingly sensory experience, so sound and taste and touch and all of that, from feelings, that they seem to be separate from one another, but they just come together. So, there's an experience, again, it might be different per person, but I'm just trying to think of something that would definitely be a plus for me, but might not. Here, my friends and I went to the Electric Fetus the other day. It's a record store in town. And we all like the same kind of music, which is not everybody's cup of tea. And after we bought our music, we went home to just have a conversation. And the problem with this music is you can't. It's music that really requires you listen to it, or you just don't put it on because it sounds like noise otherwise. And so we were having a conversation, and some guy had put a piece on that was just this droney thing. And after a while, somebody just said, well, can we turn something else on while we're having a conversation? So I said, well, I'll just grab one of my CDs. And I looked into my bag of CDs and I realized that all of it would just be so difficult to listen to that I just went, why do we listen to music like this? Do you know what I mean? Like, but the plus and the minus and the neutral is just in that case, to me, that's plus sign. To you, that might be negative. I mean, you might hear that and go, And there might be some people who, I can't imagine this would be true, who it just would be going on and they wouldn't have feelings for it one way or the other. But that's part of experience. And we don't always notice it. So in something like that, we might say, well, I like this, I don't like this, and we can click into that. But our experience has built into it right away that plus, minus, and neutral aspect. It's and we'll actually say it's because of the sensory objects, right? We're going to blame it on the world. I don't like that. I don't want that thing to happen. And really, it's just the feeling is minus. We just say the feeling is minus. But you're right. If we have to put a sign on it, I feel like a teaching like that slows us down so that we can actually pay attention to our experience, because we don't even do that. Zen actually just says, just pay attention. That's really all we're doing, paying attention. You can feel those subtle attractions or, negative feelings, or, as I pointed out many times before, right? For most people, this podium probably would be in the neutral category. You probably don't have feelings one way or the other about it. But if I told you had to look at that for 12 hours, your feeling would go from neutrality to something else at some point in there. Do you know what I mean? But these feeling, the sense of feeling that we have, we'll ascribe it to something outside of us rather than just realize it's this feeling that's showing up. And the feeling is right there in the experience, and it's informing what we do. Because if I don't like it, honestly, what we do is we adjust. We try to do something. Usually, we try to do something to get rid of what we don't like, to hang on to what we like. And we're doing that if we're not aware of those feelings arising, right? Then we're blindly just doing stuff. So I think if I were to say anything about that teaching, it's sort of like just a slowing down and starting to really get fine grained in your paying attention. But you're right, in Zen, we don't necessarily put those labels on because it is just a label. At some point, you actually have to let go of that, or you get stuck in plus, minus, neutral. You're constantly going plus, minus, neutral. You know, it can become a thing to fixate. It can become a lot like what that monk, I think, was seeing, that maybe is Joshu's caught in not abiding in clarity. That same sort of thing. You can get caught in plus, minus, and neutral because it's still a thing, but it can be a tool, I suppose, to just notice your feelings at that moment. Yeah, I still remember the time that I really noticed how my feelings didn't have to do with the outside circumstances, even though I completely was blaming the outside circumstances. And it was, you know, something we do every day. I was driving and I wanted to find a parking spot in Uptown, which, you know, parking and not just a parking spot, but I wanted free parking in Uptown because I used to live in Uptown and there used to be free parking all over Uptown. So I had an idea about Uptown, about the way Uptown should be, about how Uptown has become. And before I even left the house, I would say my experience was negative. But there I am driving around in Uptown, and I am blaming the development of Uptown on my feeling of anger. I'm saying, what is going on? You know, that was just me, you know, unconsciously plugging into the minus sign. And then I got it. I went, wait a minute, where did that actually come from? My response, where is this feeling of frustration and everything coming from? And I realized I had nothing. And honestly, when I realized that, it just, the whole situation just stopped being a problem because I felt it. It wasn't just like an intellectual understanding. I really went, oh, now I get it. It's just, let's just find a parking spot. You know, that was it. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah, they do seem at odds, but I think that teaching of the plus, minus, neutral is just to slow down and really start to develop a fine-grained awareness of what's going on. And we're so good at grabbing holds of objects. And once we do that, of plus, minus, and neutral, and then ascribing it to the object that we're having those feelings with. So I realize I went way over here, so I apologize. We should close out now, but thank you all. And again, nice to see you in the Happy New Year. Hopefully I'll see you again.